Returning to our top story now, a snap inquiry is examining the omnibus bill of hate speech and gun reforms Labor is hoping to pass after the Bondi terror attack. Joining me live is former Home Affairs Secretary Mike Pezzullo. Mike, thanks very much for your time as always. You just gave evidence in the inquiry today a short time ago. Just if you can summarise what you said today.
Well, I was called in a private capacity. Obviously, I'm a private citizen and I focused really on what the public service would be doing in the event that the legislation is passed. It's likely to be passed in some form, perhaps with some amendments. But I really spoke to the very complicated task that will occur after the Parliament does its work to introduce into operational processes, to train staff, to recruit staff who are going to have to administer these schemes, to provide them with the guidance. And the point I made, Holly, to the committee was that traditionally, particularly in the criminal law working in the counter-terrorism space, you've got quite well-defined concepts such as terror, violence, politically motivated violence, assassination, concepts like that. They're pretty graphic words that relate to graphic activities. Now you're moving into a slightly more nebulous, which is not to say I don't support the regime. I do. It's a very good regime, particularly the prohibited hate group scheme. But by definition, there's a degree of imprecision that will now have to be turned into guidance so that officers make the right decisions, either when they're cancelling a visa or when they're proposing that a group be listed or when they're perhaps investigating a hate crime. You're going to want a commonality of concepts, good training. You're going to want a lot of tools to assist those officers to do their job in what is really a transformative and revolutionary new area of security law.
I mean, a point that stood out to me today, Mike, is the words that you're not going to get perfection in the drafting, always process of refining. You spoke about additional resources too. That is, of course, a critical component here of this moving into practice, as you've just been speaking about. In your view, will the proposed bill do what it was supposed to do?
Look, it will if it's enacted as a law and not just simply then added to the, if you like, the duties and responsibilities of counter-terrorism officers or officers who work on radicalisation, violent extremism. If you accompany that introduction of law into practice and then you combine it with standing up teams, the Department of Home Affairs, for instance, I think will have to significantly reinforce a body known as the Counter-Terrorism Coordination Centre. They work on things like listing terrorist groups. Well, they're now going to have to pick up the task of listing hate groups. I would find it difficult to see, and this is going to be a challenge for the Secretary and her officers, just simply doubling everyone's workload or potentially even more than doubling because like anything in life, when you first start to do something, you're not particularly good at it or you're moving cautiously. As you get more experience, you go faster and you develop, more capability in the area. So it's like anything in life. These officers are very fine officers, but they're human like all of us. They have to learn. Machine learning will help. You're going to have to be doing a lot of social media scraping, how you get your leads, what information you're going to rely upon as to hate groups that are out there. In some cases, you'll get tip-offs from AFP and ASIO. In other cases, civil society groups will come forward. There's a whole new area of practice that if it's not properly resourced, to go to your question, it just simply won't do what's on the tin, what's on the label.
Well, that's the main concern, isn't it, that it's properly resourced and all of the things you talked us through there, it's so complex and it's going to be complex. I mean, there was some talk today, Mike, about concern around religion potentially being used as a cloak here. Do you agree with that? Do you have concerns with that? Of course, it's not set in stone and there's always the ability to change this and alter this. But what are your thoughts on that?
Look, as I read the statute on its face, the draft bill, as well as the explanatory memorandum, I can see why it's been introduced. The Prime Minister alluded to this at his press conference yesterday when he made reference to the Old Testament. The Constitution actually prohibits the Parliament at Section 116 of making laws that prohibit or in some way regulate, if you like, religious observance. So I think what the reason, my guess would be, Holly, that they've put this provision in so that when and if it goes to the High Court, and it almost certainly will, the government's lawyers, the Solicitor General and others can argue to the court, look, we have had respect for the constitutional protection of religious observance. And so if someone is quoting scripture for the purpose of religious instruction, for instance, we're not seeking to interfere with that. But a point that perhaps was missed through yesterday's proceedings that I just really want to reinforce, it's not a carve-out or an exemption at large. It's a very narrow exemption that relates to a defence that you would offer at your criminal trial. So in other words, you have to have been charged and a brief of evidence would have to have been presented that you've been engaged in this hatred and vilification, etc. So you've been charged and you're appearing before a court at your criminal trial and you rely on this provision as a defence. So I can see why they've done it. But I do note that quite a lot of groups, including the Executive Council of Australian Jewry and others, have said it really is obsolete, or I think Peter Wertheimer's, said it best. It's an outdated idea that, yeah, there are some texts that have historically, vile and horrendous references to the racial characteristics or other racial groups, which to today's ear sound horrendous and hate-filled. So why would you, import it into modern law? The only reason why I could think, Holly, that they've done it is to give themselves that additional protection in the face of a almost certain constitutional challenge.
It's going to be complex moving forward. Mike, thank you as always for your time. You've had a big day today.